On behalf of the Oshawa Public Libraries and the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities at Ontario Tech University, we'd like to welcome everyone to Beyond the Walls, virtual discussions in the liberal arts. My name is Natalie Oman, and I'm an associate professor in legal studies in the Faculty of Social Science and Humanities. I'll be hosting tonight's public lecture and conversation along with my colleagues Jen Clark and Jennifer Gardner from the library. Both of our institutions have joined forces to present this series in response to the distancing that COVID-19 has made necessary. It's our attempt to create a way for members of the university and library communities to be apart together.
My name is Jen Clark, and I'm a librarian and program coordinator at Oshawa Public Library. I'd like to begin our event with a land acknowledgement. While participants in tonight's conversation are joining us from locations close and far, our two institutions are situated on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, governed by the Williams Treaties. We are grateful to work and learn on these lands and are mindful of this treaty relationship with the Mississaugas of Scugog Island and the Greater Anishinaabe Nation of which they form a part, including Algonquin, Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi people.
We encourage everyone with us tonight to become aware of the treaty relationships and traditional territories you're situated in, wherever you may be located. Just before introducing you to our guest, a few words about etiquette for this event. The aim of this series is to give people opportunities to connect and learn together. So we've used a form of virtual meeting space that allows everyone to have a voice and a face in the conversation that will follow the speaker's talk. In order to make it work though, we have to be able to see and hear the guest whose ideas we'll be discussing. So until the presentation, the short talk is over, we'll continue to have audience members, microphones, and video muted. You'll have a chance to ask questions live after the talk. And we encourage you to use the chat bar, and that's a little bubble at the bottom of your screen that looks like the speech bubble in a cartoon. We encourage you to type your questions in while the speaker is presenting his short remarks, or if you'd like to ask your question yourself at the end rather than have it read, to type in a Q, and we'll talk a little bit more about how to do that later. Now it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Amir Mostaghim. Dr. Mostaghim is an associate teaching professor at Ontario Tech University. He teaches in the areas of policy development, policing, and perspectives on criminal justice. He's published chapters and articles in the areas of criminology and the normalization of cannabis use. He's a passionate leader in social justice advocacy and has served as a human rights observer with Amnesty International for more than a decade. Tonight, Dr. Mostaghim will be discussing why everybody can't get stoned. Welcome, Amir.
Thank you very much. And thanks everyone for joining us in this virtual world. Today, I kind of wanted to talk about having fun. And to me, having fun has oftentimes been neglected in academic circles for the simple reason that it just doesn't seem very academic. But if you think about it, we spend copious amount of our time making money going to work just to have the little bit of leisure time to have fun. And aren't we most ourselves when we have fun? When we are participating in leisure activities? Aren't we most ourselves when we are enjoying a pint of beer or listening to some music or enjoying a hobby that we do? And that's the key word, isn't it? Being ourselves, the notion of self, the notion of identity, the notion of who we really are. And that's another thing that I want to talk about today then. I want to talk about this notion of self. Who are we? And how does having fun determine not only who we are, but how does who we are determine the type of funs that we can have? The type of leisure spaces from which we get excluded from. And we don't just have fun by ourselves, do we? We don't just enjoy leisure spaces by ourselves. We usually enjoy it in groups. In music, we call it music scene. You know, if you're a punk, you listen to punk music with other punk people. If you're into reggae, you listen to reggae with other people who enjoy reggae. And these groups in which we enjoy our leisure times have codes of conduct, have rules of behavior, have particular norms. These are what we call subcultural norms of conduct. These are things that you have to know in order to authentically participate in a particular subcultural activity. For example, if you want to be a good punk, you have to know the lingo. You have to have the haircut. You have to have the clothes. If you want to be in ska music, you better know how to dress that way. You better know the dance. You better have listened to the right records. So by definition, subcultures include and exclude people. Now, here's a question though. Is this inclusion and exclusion based on identities that we adopt ourselves in order, for example, you know, I could say I'm a left-wing liberal, so yeah, it makes sense for me to listen to punk music, you know. Traditionally, you know, one would say that hardcore metal is reserved for particular type of political orientation. I know I have a student in class who would disagree with that statement. And that's, I guess, at the core of it, that's what I want to talk about. And the next thing that we have is, how do we get excluded from these subcultural activities through not identities that we project, but rather identities that we just have out of no desire or out of no choice of our own, our gender, our ethnicity, our social class even. These things include and exclude us in subcultural activities. So in short, to summarize this part of it, what I want to really focus on today is how is it that our gender and our ethnicity exclude us from participation in particular leisure activities. Since we can't talk about all leisure activities, I would like to talk about marijuana using subcultures, marijuana using groups as an example, and then we can speculate from there. There are two reasons why I want to talk about marijuana using groups. One is a personal connection that I have with it. I have been smoking weed since I was 18, 19. I have been active in, back when marijuana wasn't legalized, I was quite active in marijuana legalization groups. So I look at myself as somewhat involved in marijuana using subcultures. However, when I came to study marijuana using subcultures, everyone kept telling me how marijuana has been normalized, how everybody's doing it, that it's no big deal anymore. And that didn't really match with my own experiences. My own experiences showed that I was usually the only racial minority in marijuana using groups. Most of my female colleagues didn't participate. So that's one reason why I became interested in marijuana using subcultures, and why I think it's a useful thing to talk about. I had an advisor who would say, do what you know. So here I am doing what I know. The next reason is the history of weed. You see, marijuana, hemp, I guess in a sense, has been used since time immemorial for making nets and for building sails and things like that. Persians and Indians and the Chinese sort of recognize a sticky residue and its effect pretty quickly though. And since that time, it has become a staple part of both cultural and religious ceremonies in large parts of the world. Hemp and marijuana were so central to the life of Europeans that, for example, in a book about what it is that we should take with us should we leave Earth to go to another planet in late 1800, it was speculated that what we should take with us is weed because it is very useful for both medicinal purposes and hemp is useful for making rope. However, the current cultural history of marijuana really begins in the United States in early 1900s, around 1910. This is the height of New Orleans, where the sailors are coming in and going, where the Berdolas of the story will, with their exotic ladies of the night, are the talk of the town, and the men are there to enjoy these ladies. And at this time, a particular music is born, and that is jazz. Now, here's what's interesting about jazz. You see, up until that point, what you did was you went and you listened to music. Jazz was one of the first music that was played in the backgrounds. What that meant was that the attention of those who listened to it was oftentimes on others and not on the musicians. So that required musicians to have a substance that requires, that sort of combats boredom but doesn't dull the senses. And soon they found marijuana did just that. Muta, as a drug was called in the city, soon became a favorite not only of those who played the music, but those who listened to the music as well, and migrated with the Black musicians from southern United States to places like Chicago and Harlem. It was in these jazz halls that for the very first time, the races enjoyed a substance together. It was the first time that the Black and the white kids danced together in dance halls. They smoked weed together, they drank together, they had fun together. As Stanley Crouch, a jazz historian, points out, jazz predicted the civil rights movement more than any other arts in America, and there certainly would not have been a jazz scene should there had not been a marijuana scene. After that, marijuana became soon associated with the hippie subculture and the sort of bohemians at the time. And at the same time, it became associated with fears of intrusion of other races into white races. Just watch Reefer Madness, it'll tell you all you need to know. And it was at this point that marijuana's status got cemented as a drug of those who rebel against dominant culture. Similar things happen across the pond in the United Kingdom. But in the 1990s, people have started talking about marijuana as a normalized substance. Now, if you're interested in the history of marijuana, there's a really good book by Thomas Abel called Marijuana, the First 10,000 Year History. I highly recommend it. Read it. It's quite thick. It's 10,000 years. But I highly recommend it. Anyhow, in the 1990s, early 2000s, people started talking about normalization of marijuana use. People started saying, people like, for example, outside of United Kingdom, started talking about how marijuana use has become a part of an everyday life of the youth, that it has become enjoyed by conventionally unconventional people. In other words, everybody was doing it. It's no big deal anymore. It has become normalized. However, as I said, that didn't sit well with me. So I figured, let's see if that's true. Let's ask people if that's true, because most of the studies came from these meta-analysis. Most of them, I noticed, talk to white kids. So I started asking questions. I figured let's design an experiment. We designed this experiment. We handed out surveys to about 2,000 undergraduate students in Guelph, Toronto, and Alberta. We interviewed about 300 of them, both users and non-users. And we were interested in one big thing. Why do you smoke weed, or why don't you smoke weed? And what do you think about people who smoke weed? Soon we realized that it was true. A portion of the group that we were talking to were saying that marijuana use is no big deal. These were oftentimes white men. For them, marijuana use seemed to be by default. They were saying, well, it's no big deal. I didn't even think about using it. Yeah, I just did it. But for women, especially Pan-Asian students, that's what we focused on, students from the Asian continent. So that's why my Pan-Asian students. We focused on them because they were sort of still in the sense of not being part of the culture. So we had the sense, so we kind of started asking these people questions. We said, why don't you smoke weed? Well, it turns out for women and Pan-Asian students, no smoking weed was more of the default point. Most of them who did use had given it a lot of thought of why it is that they want to use it. Some use it as a way of integrating themselves into a white masculine culture. For example, some women said that they kind of saw themselves as tomboys, or they kind of liked hanging around with the guys, so it was a way of including themselves into a culture. Some sort of Pan-Asian students said that it was a way for them to not feel like an immigrant kid walking around. Everybody was doing this, so they were it was a way for them to do it. One of them, for example, commented on how skateboarder kids were doing it. Interestingly enough, the other group, the ones who weren't doing it, saw marijuana use as an authentic participation for their own group. For example, women said that those women who smoke weed are different. They were often seen as promiscuous or slutty. We saw the same comments if you look at research, for example, in the 1950s, 1960s, about women drinking in public, or in 1930s, women smoking in public. Similar comments were said. Women who go to bars, even in the 1970s and 1980s, were referred to in promiscuous sense. So that wasn't, too surprising. Even men who smoked weed seemed to say that they wouldn't really take a woman who smokes weed seriously. They would go out with them, but they're not like the wife type, they would say. You wouldn't wife them, as some would refer to. Similarly, some brown students said that, for example, one of them I was talking to, I said, surely brown kids who smoke weed. He said, no, real brown kids don't smoke weed. I said, well, I know a lot of brown kids who smoke weed. And he said, oh yeah, but only coconuts who smoke weed. Coconuts are trying to be brown in the outside and white in the inside. So one of my papers that I wrote, the title of it was Only Coconuts Who Smoke Weed. But that's the point. The point is that marijuana use doesn't seem to be an authentic activity by these groups. Those who did use it oftentimes use it in particular ways. For example, what white men said that they didn't really care about where they use it, who they tell. Yeah, they want to tell their boss, for example, about it, or their prof, but they don't really care who finds out where they use it. Women and Pan-Asian students were much more likely to use it in private and be cautious who they use it with. They were also much less likely to use paraphernalia. Interestingly enough, when we talk about intersectionality, I know one of my colleagues is online, and she would have my head if I don't mention it. When you look at the intersection between gender and ethnicity, this is where it becomes interesting. We found 0 brown women who smoked weed, or 0 Chinese women who smoked weed. And those were the 2 groups that we were mostly interested in, because just our sample size were that way. But brown, I mean sort of like Indian, Pakistani, Afghani, places like that, Sri Lanka, places like that. So Central Asia and Middle East. Interestingly enough, none of them smoked weed. And for example, when I said to them, why don't you smoke weed? Most of them even laughed. They said, what do you mean? If I smoke weed, it'll ruin my parents. And that was interesting because, for example, when I was talking to Asian men, they were saying, yeah, if I smoke weed, it's bad for my own sort of thing, for my own reputation, but not really for my parents. Whereas for Asian women, it was not only bad for their parents, but some of them commented that if they smoke weed and they get found out, it might even mean that their sister can't find a husband, which places a huge demand. Whereas when you talk to white men, they oftentimes say even if they got found out, it's no big deal. And that's, I guess, the key. Now, when we decided to look at why that is, part of it was just representation of media, maybe. That in media, white men are usually represented as cool, chill stoners. Women are usually presented as a stoner babe who are there to just kind of look good. And usually when you have a colored person who smokes weed, they're presented as having problems. Now, I want to get to this point quickly, though. My point is not that people should go smoke weed. Okay, that's not my point at all. My point rather is something different. My point is that that exclusion of people from marijuana using subcultures is a part of a larger problem of exclusion of women and racial minorities from leisure spaces. You see what I mean? So the argument is not people should go and smoke weed. The argument is that if people don't want to smoke weed, they should have their own reason for not smoking. They shouldn't say, I'm not smoking weed because I'm not welcomed in this group. I don't smoke weed because it's detrimental to my identity. I don't smoke because it's detrimental to my family. They should say, I don't smoke because I don't want to. That's fair enough. But people should not be excluded from places without their own choice. That's my point that I'm making. Now, this is part of a larger exclusion of these people from leisure spaces. For example, in academia, we talk about culture. We talk about sort of nighttime economy, as in going out to bars, going out to clubs. We know women don't go to bars. Women don't go to clubs alone. They don't participate in the fun as much. They don't drink as much when they go out, and don't stay late as much. They look at it as not something feminine. Oftentimes what women do, when we look at research, when we look at undergraduate students, we find that oftentimes when women do, they do with their male friends. Groups of women going out on a nights out is rarer than sort of media wants you to believe. It's often in mixed groups, rather than boys go together alone. More importantly though, men show up to clubs, men show up to bars on their own, whereas women usually show up in groups. However, when we look at the leisure activities by gender, we find that women are much more comfortable to have fun at home. Same is true for racial minorities. Racial minorities are excluded from nighttime economy, not just from nighttime leisure, not just by police and the brutality of the police and the brutality of the bouncer on the black kid, but also by the fact that they don't get let into clubs, that they're looked at as weird inside the club. They rather go hang out in a parking lot to get away from others. My point here is this. We have to pay attention to leisure. Read CBC. They were talking about how, for example, we open up baseball diamonds, but not cricket fields. Leisure activity is the place in which we come together. Leisure activity is the place in which we have fun. Leisure activity is the place in which we are the most ourselves, and we have to pay attention to it. If we don't, we will forever be separate. It's not enough for us to work together. We should have fun together. Our children should have fun together. We know for a fact, and there are good historical reasons about it, and we can talk about it in the discussion, Black Canadians are much less likely to go to a public pool than a white Canadian is, than a European Canadian is. We know this for a fact. We know for a fact that women are much less likely to enjoy sport activities outside than men are. Well, why is that? As long as races and genders cannot have fun together, as long as we separate these areas from each other, our leisure practices from each other, we cannot truly be ourselves around each other. That's all I have to say. Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I'll pass it on to, I guess, Natalie, is it I pass it on to?
It's actually me. Hi. All right, thank you, Amir, for that.
My apologies.
It's no problem. Thank you. That was a fascinating lecture. We already have some questions in the chat bar, and I'm sure our audience members will have more comments and questions to ask. So I'm going to turn it over to Natalie to say a few words about how that will work.
I'll just second Jen's thanks to Amir. That was a fantastic talk, and I'm sure it's already inspired quite a few questions. But I'm just here for a moment to remind everyone that you have a choice about how to share your questions and comments. So both of them involve the chat window in the center of the bottom of your screen, the little bubble there. So you can indicate your questions two ways. One is actually by typing your question in, and if you do that, then Jen Clark will read it for you. The alternative is to type in a Q. Just type in a Q and we can see your name. And Jennifer Gardner and Jen Clark and I are keeping a speakers list, and we'll unmute your mic and you can ask your question yourself. And we encourage everybody to open their video so that we can all participate together and see one another and have a bit of a sense of the community of conversation that we've got on the go here tonight. Okay, Jen, I'll turn it over to you.